Thank you. And there've been quite a few requests to share the recordings. So I think we are planning to, make it quite public just so folks are aware. And if you're uncomfortable with that piece, you could turn off your video, but otherwise it'd be lovely to have people keep their videos on if they're willing and able. So I would actually just mostly like to start by introducing myself very briefly and then introducing Rebecca Kemble, who is one of the two presenters, the other being Cheyenna Weber. My name is Hazel Corcoran, and I'm executive director of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, and currently I am in Mi'kma'ki, which is traditional unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, although I usually live in Treaty 7 territory in Calgary. I will start by introducing Rebecca, just a very informal intro to say that I've known Rebecca for, I guess, since like late 2010. She used to be the president of the US Federation of Worker Co-ops, and that's the context in which we first met. She was basically from their board, coming to the board of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation at that time. And so she is a driver at Union Cab Co-operative in Madison, Wisconsin, an anthropologist by training, has been an alder at the City Council of Madison, Wisconsin for a couple of terms, and basically spends her life working in the solidarity economy and does a lot of writing as well. And it's a pleasure to introduce her, and I would like to ask her to take us through some of the other intro pieces and then get us going into the workshop. Rebecca, over to you.
Could you introduce Cheyenna and then I'll...
Of course, I could do that as well. I was thinking that was going to come at a later point, but I'm very happy to do that as well. And I have not had the pleasure of meeting Cheyenna Weber in person, but I have had the pleasure of being on another webinar that she had given, and it was wonderful. She is a writer and organizer and consultant who is originally from Virginia, I think it is. And I'm sorry, I don't know the right pronunciations for the traditional territories of the folk there, but she's now living in Brooklyn. She works in the solidarity economy, including as an online trainer and designer with the People's Hub, which is a phenomenal organization that I've only also recently discovered, doing movement work school. It's a movement school, I guess. And it also does disability justice programming as well as solidarity economy work. She's with the Cooperative Economics Alliance of New York City, Solidarity NYC, New Economy Coalition, which CWCF, our federation, is a member of, the Grassroots Economic Organizing Collective, where Jessica Gordon-Emhard and Len Kerman and other good friends and colleagues have been. So, and also does work in Indigenous solidarity education. I wanted to hold that up as well. So yeah, I'll turn it over to the two of you, Rebecca and Cheyenna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you. Yes, I am Rebecca Kemble. I'm on Ho-Chunk territory in so-called Madison, Wisconsin, where I've been a worker cooperator, as Hazel said, at Union Cab since the year 2000. So we're really excited that you all are here with us today. We have this website. I will put it back in the chat again, that we have developed and will talk to you about as we go through today. And we've planned on a workshop so you can really dig into some of these principles and some practices. We'll have 2 breakout sessions and have some larger group harvesting time. So I think this is the first actual workshop. We did a presentation to the CWCF board, but this is the first workshop where we can really dig in together that's out of the United States. So we're really excited to hear what Canadians, and I see there's someone from Brazil here, what your perspectives on these are. Kenzie, next slide, please.
And someone from Scotland, I would just add as well.
Oh, from Scotland. Wonderful. So what we're up to today, whoops, can you, yep, we're here to develop a shared set of solidarity economy principles and practices to build the solidarity economy movement in the US and Canada. And we approach this work today with humility, knowing that what we're doing today is based on, centuries and centuries of work and thinking and practice of others, and that together we know a lot more, and a lot of our collective genius comes out when we do work together. We approach this work today with care, where we pay attention to the impact and consequences of our words and actions on ourselves and others. For those of us in the co-op movement, we've had a lot of experience dealing with that. We know how deeply we're connected to each other in our means of livelihood, and how the consequences of our words and actions really do affect the whole. And we're asked to hold three things as context for this work. Number one, that we're on stolen native land in the Canada and the US, probably in Brazil too. Scotland also has, Scotland's history of just waves and waves of domination and colonization. And our whole system in this hemisphere, for sure in Brazil and the United States and in Canada and in Scotland as part of the head of the British Empire, all of that system and wealth in our countries has been built on stolen Black lives and labor. And we're also part of the land and the earth. We're not apart from it. So as we do our work, we acknowledge our relatives in our winged relatives, our relatives with paws, with fins, our plant relatives, understanding that we all depend on each other in mutuality to survive. Next slide. So what we're up to today is an opening and overview of the Solidarity Economy Principles Project. We're going to help you to understand the needs that inspired this with clarity about what this is and isn't. We'll dig into the principles together, explore how some of these principles are alive in our work and in our world, and we'll apply them in scenarios, looking at some cases in which the principles could be applied. And then at the end, we'll invite you to provide feedback on the principles at our website. Next slide, please. Actually, you know what? Can you go ahead to the one after that? And then we'll come back to this. So this is a quote from Alandria Williams, who was the executive director of the People's Hub, a popular educator, worked for years at the Highlander Center, and was a mover and shaker in the Unitarian Universalist world in this country. Hazel, I don't know if you ever met Alandria through the UUs in Canada, but Alandria was a youth leader, was a disability rights advocate, a solidarity advocate in that space, and is really held now as an elder by the Unitarians, as well as in the worker co-op and solidarity economy world. This is a quote from Alandria during their last summer of life. They died in September 2020 at a very young age due to some heart issues and health problems. But Alandria really inspired this work, and this is what they were thinking about near the end of their life. It's time to have a real good integrative plan around where do we want to be and go, and how do we want to love ourselves in the midst. And the context of this whole work is of me and Cheyenna and two of our friends, Rachel and Eli, who were collaborating with Alandria on the Beautiful Solutions book, which I think they finally got their manuscript out to the editors. But look that up, Beautiful Solutions. So we had all worked very closely with Alandria in different ways. And on my part, it was about getting the worker cooperative movement to actually become a movement, which, you know, there's some doubt, are we really a movement or are we just a collection of businesses? But really bringing in those economic ties, economic trade relations, supply chains. And Alandria was pushing for the tool of worker cooperatives and of solidarity economy tools to be way more widespread, understood, and practiced within different movements, different liberation movements. And they were just a powerhouse of a human being, now an ancestor. And as we grieved Alandria's passing, we came together, so a year ago last fall, and just started talking to each other about how we were processing our grief, and realized that there was something coming through the four of us through that grief that needed to be finished in the world. And from each of our four different perspectives, it came down to, we need a common definition of solidarity economy and some principles that we can all agree on and hold each other accountable about. Kenzie, can you go back one slide, please? So this is very personal, no, the other way. This is very personal work for Cheyenna and myself and our other two collaborators who we worked that fall into the early winter and realized we need a lot more people engaged in this. So we opened it up a bit. But this is really why we're doing this work, to build unity and shared culture around this solidarity economy, the concept and the practice, to deepen our collective understandings of the diversity of forms and viewpoints that make up the solidarity economy, and to continue to build from what which was Alandria's nickname, taught us and what we worked on together. So if you go forward 2 slides, Kenzie, we realized that the four of us could not do this work on our own. We needed to ask others who we know had worked with Alandria and who had worked with some of these ideas and concerns we had to join us. So here's a list of folks. Many of them worker cooperators, only one of them Canadian, Drew Ojije. He was with us for the first part of our work, and then he just got so busy with launching the breach that I think he had to step back. So we were helped by Jessica Gordon-Nemhart, Jim Johnson, and Marcia Lee in consultation and editing work. So if you go forward one more slide, please. So we worked over the summer to come up with a draft of the document, which is now at the website. And we have embarked since last September on this journey of sharing it with other close solidarity economy groups, and are asking for your feedback. So that's what this is about today. We haven't completely opened it up to the whole world yet. We hope to very shortly. But this is what we're up to today. So what we mean by solidarity economy is that it rests on our shared values of cooperation, democracy, social and racial justice, environmental sustainability, and mutualism. We seek to create systems that honor the interdependence of all beings and elevate the needs of those beings over the priorities of systems based on individualism, profit, and private property. Go ahead one slide, please, Kenzie. So solidarity economy is distinct from the social economy, which according to Michelle Williams includes nonprofits, co-ops, and social enterprises that, quote, seek to achieve limited progressive change within the confines of the current social order by ameliorating the effects of market failure, unemployment, and poverty. Solidarity economy is a transformative vision of society based on democratic self-management, redistribution, solidarity, and reciprocity. So above, we talk about the social economy, including nonprofits, co-ops, and social enterprises that have this aim to ameliorate the effects of market failure. Solidarity economy also involve nonprofits, co-ops, and social enterprises. The difference is that they are firmly rooted in structures and visions that are transformative of society. So, and have democratic self-management, redistribution, solidarity, and reciprocity structures. Next slide. So a solidarity economy only develops when we work together as a movement in networks and federations and coalitions that themselves embody solidarity economy values. This is where we become truly powerful. Ultimately, solidarity economy values and goals cannot be achieved without the inclusion of a broad set of actors and a firmer commitment to joint strategy, collective action, and solidarity. Next slide. So these in our document/website, we came up with a lot of principles and practices underneath those principles based on practices of already existing groups who are doing solidarity economy work. But we group them into these 5 main categories: accountability and relationship, shared resources and shared vision, liberation culture, democracy and processes, and education, leadership, and development. Next slide. And again, all of those are rooted in the values of cooperation, democracy, social and racial justice, environmental sustainability, and mutualism. So I am just trying to check in where we're at with our agenda. And I think, Cheyenna, we will go, you can go to the next slide, Kenzie, and we'll move on to the next section of our agenda where we're going to talk about some of these principles and then go into quick breakout groups.
Yeah. So, hey, everybody. So I'm Cheyenna, you, she, and her. And just want to really express gratitude to the folks who brought us here today and all of you. The highest gift is the gift of time and attention. So just really appreciate that you all are here to think about this with us. It's I think sometimes we can treat Zoom like they're throwaway gatherings because maybe it's easy to join, but it's still a commitment. It's still meaningful. It's still an opportunity to build relationships. So thank you for being here. We were going to take a moment to just reflect on some of these principles together in small groups. So these are the questions that we're going to ask you to consider. So how do you see groups hold your category of principle? And each group that you're going to be in a breakout, each one has its own category and set of slides, which we will share with you here in the chat to make sure that you can access them. Please let us know in the chat if you have any issues accessing the slides. And you're going to look at, how does the dominant culture not hold this principle? And are there ways that this principle shows up in nature? And you're going to have 15 minutes, so you should have enough time to kind of get through those 3 things. You don't necessarily need to take any notes, but when we come back into the big group, we will ask folks to share out. You can either come off mute at that time or put it in the chat. So if it's helpful for you to jot down notes that you want to share in the chat, you're welcome to do that. And I think that it should be pretty simple in that when you go to the slides, you should be able to find yours starting on 13, so 13 to 17. And they're each labeled category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And your groups are labeled groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just do the principle that is related to your group. And again, you're just going to look at say category 1 or category 2 and think about these 3 questions, which we will also put in the chat. And they are also in the slides on slide 12, also in case you need to refer back to them. And with that, Kay, I think we can open the rooms and send folks out, unless anybody has any questions. Okay. I'll see you all in a minute. And you might want to pause the recording. Otherwise, you'll have to edit this out later, this 15-minute break that we're on. I'll put in the questions that we were asking, and yeah, invite anybody who wants to, who was doing category, well, actually, I'm sorry, we didn't have anybody doing category 1, but Rebecca wanted to make sure that we mentioned it. Rebecca, do you want to give a quick reflection on category 1? Super snappy, 30 seconds.
So category 1 was accountability and relationships. And I was saying that, you know, the dominant culture, AKA capitalism, I mean, it literally is about disregarding relationships with each other and category and accountability, unless it's involved with the market or money. So that's a very thin, insubstantial way of building an economy of living beings. And in nature, on the other hand, the interrelationship and accountability is inherent in how nature and living systems work. We're constantly making micro adjustments to the actions of others and to relationships of others. And it's always changing to maintain or protect the health of the system. So that's just some reflections on that first one.
Thank you. Did anybody else end up doing number 1? Did anybody finish early and end up doing number 1? No? Okay. So folks who were looking at category 2, do you want to share something back? And by the way, any of you can put things in the chat too. If you have things you wanted to share there, you don't necessarily have to come off mute.
I was in group 2, so I could share a little bit. So we did talk about like how shared resources and vision appears in nature. Corey brought up the example of like mycelium and how the food soil network is an example of various stakeholders, if you will, kind of sharing resources back and forth for the good of the whole network. And we also talked a little bit about multi-stakeholder networking and how that's a framework that allows for various stakeholders to all work together, but still remain as independent and autonomous groups. And so, and how that differs from the dominant or capitalist economy is that there's knowledge sharing that happens within multi-stakeholder networks, whereas in the capitalist world, you have to keep that knowledge as proprietary so that you can continue to make money off of it. Whereas in a solidarity economy, that knowledge should be distributed so that everyone can benefit. So I don't know if Reba, if you wanted to add anything else in.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, wonderful insight. Thank you. How about group 3, liberation culture?
We also talked about trees and the mycelium network as being a place in which there is sharing of resources and information as a way of distributing resources rather than competing over spoils. And then overall, of creating person-centered networks as opposed to ones that are not so person-centered.
Awesome, thank you. And how about category 4, democracy and process?
Hello. We did 4, and we were just kind of comparing, the hierarchy of a larger structure where you have to go through, 10 people to get anything done as compared to where you can actually get things done independently on your own with, just asking, just a couple people up higher or even just one person higher. How the structure is that, you're dependent on getting things done through a process as compared to just getting it done.
We had a
Okay.
little bit of discussion about whether you could separate the issue of democratic structures from ownership or not. I say my background is much more cooperatives, and so I find it difficult to look at structures in isolation from ownership and how that works. But we didn't really kind of like reach a conclusion on that.
Martin diving right into one of the main tensions in the movement. Yeah, exactly, right? What is the role of ownership? What can we learn from co-ops and that legacy and shared ownership? And then where is the concept of private property ownership preventing us from doing more, right? It's very dynamic. Thank you for naming that. Category 5, education and leadership development. Anybody want to share?
I'm willing to, but I was hoping one of the co-panelists with me might step up. If no, I will. I'll just say briefly that we talked about, there goes a motorcycle, but the fact that there's so much of history that people aren't educated about, don't know, and the fact of genocide of Indigenous people not being known, and how hurtful and painful this is. And some people do talk politically correctly, but their actions aren't real or don't support what they say. We also talked about this notion that the idea of democratizing educational practices is so important, and this could perhaps really be better integrated into cooperative education, because even there, sometimes it's a pretty old style of learning that's used, and there's a lot of potential for adult education principles coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to the next component of this, which is getting to practice with some scenarios. And you might have, you are likely to be familiar with some of these scenarios. They're likely to have come up in your own work, and you're welcome to talk about that. I'm just going to very quickly share my screen so you can see. So the instructions are, you're going to read your scenario together and think about some ways that you might approach it. And some, if there's any flags or any concerns or anything based on your experience, how you might approach it. And then each scenario is coupled with some principles. So you'll see a slide just before your scenario, which you can take a look at and think about, how do those principles speak to it? So if you were going to try to refine your approach to be aligned with those principles, how might you do that? And what practices you might try? What tools do you already have from your own experience or from the larger cooperative or solidarity economy spaces? And where do we not have tools and we need to do some work? And I think we anticipated perhaps doing one of these together, but I actually think that, Kay, do we have our 5 breakout groups set up? Not hearing from Kay yet. Kay is making our 5 breakout groups. So what we'll do is it'll again correspond to the number of the principal will correspond to your breakout group. And you're in different groups this time. And you can take notes there on the slides if you like to, or share back as you choose. See you in a minute. Juliet, you don't have to join if you don't want to, but if you'd like to and you're having trouble, let us know.
I'm using my phone, so I'm switching back and forth, going on trying to get the document and then to go into the room. So can I be put into a breakout room now?
Yes. Yes. I think you were invited to a room. So you should have gotten a little invitation. You just have to click accept.
Yeah, it's no longer on the screen. Yeah, it's no longer on the screen because I was trying to pull up the document. And so I lost that because I'm using my phone. So it's a bit, yeah. I have to switch
Okay.
back and forth.
Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna move you into another room, I think is the thing to do. I don't think there's a way to reissue that invitation.
I know, that's what I was wondering. And then Hazel needs to be removed or somebody, she's gonna be alone.
Right. So it should, Julia, it should be still on your phone. It won't go away unless you minimize it, but it'll be behind some of the applications.
Okay, so let me check. Yeah, okay, let me check.
Oh, good, she's in. But now
Oops.
Hazel's out.
I came back because I was
Oh.
the only person in the breakout room.
Well, we were
Oh,
trying to
we
get
just sent you
Juliet
one.
in with you, but Juliet was having trouble getting her invite. So now she
Well,
just
shall
left
I
as you
go
came back.
back?
Yeah, can you go back?
If it's possible, I'm gonna try. Is there a way? Kay, I think you have to send me.
If you go to the 3 buttons at the bottom that says more, like the 3 dots, you should be able to say join.
All right, it says breakout rooms. Bye. Room 3, join. Okay, great.
Okay, so Kay went in.
Kay went in. There we go.
Hazel went in, good.
Okay, I'm gonna
Okay.
pause.
This very specific issues that raised the need for this, tensions in the movement. For example, I did say something about, is the worker cooperative movement in the US really a movement, and digging into that question and to what's happening that makes us feel like we're not a movement. For example, there's a lot of nonprofits in the US right now that are getting a lot of that have put themselves out as the sort of worker co-op developers, and as the worker co-ops and / employee ownership as the solution to economic inequality, but they're not actually following solidarity economy principles and how they do their business or relate to the actual worker cooperatives. And it's a big problem because it means resources are not, they're not coordinated to the intent of actual movement building. And there are a lot of different actors in the space that we haven't really come to agreement or good working relationships on, even a basic definition of what is a worker co-op. So it's a real issue and a real problem in the United States.
this lack of unity around the worker co-ops in specific particular, but I would say generally more solidarity economy practices and principles. And so this project is really aimed at encouraging us to have those discussions and to move together in a much better way, because we don't have a lot of time to waste on not working together, on not moving together. We're in a time in history of this planet where there's a huge quickening of forces that we need to reckon with, and we can reckon with them better if we do so collectively and in a unified way. So I just wanted to add those comments, if that helped to understand that the project and the smaller pieces we're asking you to think about.
Rebecca, for giving folks that context. And yeah, I mean, the scenarios are an opportunity to try on basically what it's like to try to apply some of these principles and the kind of things that are coming up in a lot of our organizations and in the course of our work. And that's a way to kind of step back from that bigger piece that Rebecca's talking about, but obviously the two go hand in hand. So I want to, just in the interest of time, just keep us moving. So we're looking at a slide right now of the first scenario, which is about a teammate who's showing up late and what to do about it. And I want to invite the folks who were in that group to speak to what approach you thought would be best to take. So I think that might be Terry.
There was just myself and Christine and Greg and Kenzie. And basically, to me, it's communication. If you're building teams, it's going to be all about the approach. What are considerations and which ways it could go? It could go many ways depending on the dynamics of the humans involved. So, communication then is 98% of effectiveness, I figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously communication, making sure you've got team building going on and communication and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And part of this principle, there's several principles under this category. And one of them was, we don't throw people away, but we also don't let harm slide. So
I'm going to address this right now. We brought this up because I feel like I've missed a webinar on the organization and these principles. I don't even know what these organizations, I feel like we're deep diving down into small examples of things without a context for the greater. Thank you for filling that in, by the way. So, but the whole way through this, I've been feeling like I missed the first class. So I'm finding it a little hard to sit there and go, all of a sudden I'm down in a small group situation here where we're trying to solve something that to me is very obvious. But again, that's just me. So
totally appreciate that feedback. Thank you. And
that's
also,
where it came from. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. And also it might seem obvious because of your experience working with these issues, right? For somebody that's newer to it, they might be like more flummoxed by what to do when a teammate isn't following through on expectations.
Absolutely.
In the US in particular, we have a lot of new worker co-ops that have just formed in the last 2 years. And, this is the kind of thing that comes up, and people that don't have experience trying to manage each other really struggle often.
Oh, yeah. And I'm seeing that everywhere. Like in my work, a lot of my work is community economic development and groups. We all have, here where I am in northeastern New Brunswick, Canada, we have a whole silo issue going on where if I don't have to, the only way they want to work together is unless it's all about what I need from you. That's what I'm seeing going on as we're coming out of COVID here. It just seems like there's a whole fracture in what community building and working together in cooperation even means anymore. So I feel like we're in a kind of like this is very important work. There's no doubt about it, because we're going to be forced here soon is what I see,
Yeah.
Like you say, there's an urgency that people don't see yet, but it's there.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate everything you're doing. I'm just not as familiar with it as I'd like to be. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for sticking with it. As you're sort of figuring it out, we're figuring it out too, as you might have noticed, and learning how to present this information and how to engage folks on it. So appreciate your comments and your thoughts on all of those things. They're all very
Thank you
important.
for your patience with me as well.
Let's move on to group 2. So shared resources and shared vision. This was about a group that did like sort of a coalition of members getting funding in a different way. And the money going mostly to well-resourced groups rather than to the groups that really needed it. So this is more of a nonprofit philanthropy context. Anybody in group 2 want to share some of the thoughts you had based on this or what came up?
Yeah, I can go ahead again. So with the principle of creating abundance, not scarcity, it seems so right off the bat, this organization is not following the principles of a solidarity economy. Ways that they could try to evaluate the lending criteria a little bit better, but Val, my other group member, works with computer modeling, so we thought that maybe creating some criteria for need and using some computer modeling to kind of sort out where that money could go could be helpful. We also talked about developing reporting criteria, and that follows the principle of financial and data transparency. So if there was reporting on key performance indicators or how those investments were put towards the common good, might show a better picture of how that money could be or could have been better put to use. Now, and we kind of thought about too, it's not necessarily the case that giving money to well-resourced organizations is potentially a better use if those organizations have a better framework for applying that funding and making it actually go to a need, whereas possibly funding an organization that is not well resourced, they might have to use that funding just to operate for internal operations. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, depending on the context. And investing in a solidarity economy and cooperative identities directly. I think I recently read a case study about Triodos Bank. It's a bank operated out of the Netherlands, but they have impact investment criteria that kind of goes beyond. They say they will not invest in anything that potentially causes social or environmental harm, but they go further and they say that it also must be for the common good. And so implementing some criteria around investments, making sure that they are for the common good, can help to spread that, create abundance. And one other thing that we thought too is that if they had a grant committee that had a diverse stakeholder membership, that might also help to bring more voices to the table, to communicate where the needs are, and that might help to direct their investments a little better.
Thank you. Yeah, all of these things are coming up a lot in the US context. And I'm trying to pull a little report for you. Maybe you all have seen this. There's social movement investing. This is another impact investment. You'll have to look for it. My computer's doesn't like that I'm running so many programs, so I'm going to stop trying to find it because it's going to freak out on me. But if you go to that website, there's a report on there called Social Movement Investing. If any of you are curious about some other criteria that folks in the US are thinking about for these considerations, that's one way. Kinsey, if you want to go to the next slide, and if we want to hear from the third group, which was, let's see, liberation culture. And you all had lots to say, actually. So Kinsey, if you go forward a couple more. So there we go. That's good. So there were a couple here, right? The stories were about founders, having co-op founders that are at the forefront of decision making and tend to have more power in the group and how to handle that. And another one was about a white-led organization that's trying to become more diverse and bring on more BIPOC staff and what they need to do in order to address that. And it looks like the group had a lot to say. So I just want to invite anybody from that group to share a little bit about your takeaways.
Okay, great. My name is Juliet, and I'll just go ahead and share our the outcomes of our discussions. So we thought about this in terms of the organization needing like overarching cultural values shift, not just in their hiring, but in all their processes. So they should get one of the suggestions, a BIPOC expert team for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a subject matter expert or a team to do an audit of the organization and all their practices, their processes, like top down. And that will allow them identify the gaps that they have and be able to create the solutions to plug that. So they have to hear from the people that they're hiring to understand why they're leaving, a need to create an environment that's very safe, that's equitable, so that people are, feel valued, they feel seen and heard so that they can speak out. So exit interviews, that will be valuable, especially if people are allowed to share their views candidly. Also need to do some awareness, anti-racism training. So the whole ESG component, not just on anti-racism, but representation in general, and to be able to create that cultural shift that they need. There's a need for also individual psychometric testing to know where those people at the top, where they are, to understand their biases and the barriers that are, and so the trainings will then be targeted instead of just the flatlining kind of training that may not address it. Then there's a need to consider hiring staff not only at the mid-level or lower level, but also at the executive level. So representation at the top would really matter because people love to see role models that look like them, and to ingrain culture, you have to make sure it's from the top. Equity deserving groups who have made it need to reach back, mentor, support. So again, cascading down through the whole organization. Very critical, we identify to avoid tokenism and make sure that this is real systemic change. And also leadership needs to be very intentional and open up the space, right? So that the people that are leading the transformation are the people that are affected and not this do to. So it's you're allowing an asset-based system where it's the people that are driving that change. Then build trust among BIPOC demographics and the communities. That can be through, I love what Ivan talked about, impact investing in those communities, doing things for those communities so they see that it's not just mantras. Something that the leadership, let's see, the organization has to focus on solutions and results. So again, not tokenism, not mantra, not rhetoric. There was an example that Hazel had given about the Federation, the Canadian Worker Corporate Federation, the commitment to the work that's being done, the way they're approaching it kind of like is similar to this scenario because the Federation was predominantly, like over 12 years ago, she said predominantly like white. But what they've done now is creating a JEDI committee, Racial Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee, where those are the people leading that change. So the executive are now listening instead of being the one prescribing, right? So allowing the people to drive the change. And then there's a critical need to lift this up in other spheres, not just like for this organization, for instance, for them to also be plugged into like the ecosystem of other organizations so that this is amplified and it's not a one-off thing. Yeah, sorry, we came up with quite a bit.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Juliet. I think what I love about doing these workshops is that there's so much deep wisdom in the group always. Like people know how to handle these problems. Folks have some great ideas. And so there's a whole strategic plan there, is what I just heard on that slide. If you're in an organization that needs one on this issue, it sounds like this is some pretty good advice. this category of liberation culture, it's about everything, right? It's about race, it's about disability, it's about all kinds of inclusion that you would want to consider. And even also, by the way, the earth, right? Like, how are we getting to that place of interdependence, which is core to solidarity economies and is in direct opposition to the dominant culture, right? Which is trying to just commodify everything. And how do you get as much use out of a person or a thing? So it's very much, it's hard, right? And it's way deeper than just trying to create a Benetton ad, right? Organization that just looks good and has all of the right demographics on it. It's actually about shifting an entire culture. So I really appreciate how deep you all went into that. I'm going to move us to category 4, which was democracy and process. So solidarity economy organizations are democratic, and their federations and networks are democratic, and all sorts of things come up about that. And the scenario was about money and bringing in money into the organization and the power dynamics that creates. And I'm wondering if anybody from group 4 wants to share.
Yeah, I've been volunteered. Whether that's a good idea, I'll leave my colleagues to judge. So we've got this guy coming in, or this woman coming in, a sugar daddy or sugar mummy. And we feel that we needed a bit more information to know how desperate we are for cash, because it may be that we're all going to, walk down the road tomorrow unless we get this cash. So we need to, anyway, we figure that we need to know more about what the motives are of the person with the cash and how much they understand the principles on which we operate. So we need to make it clear to them that this organization isn't a $1 one vote. It's a kind of one person, one vote. So the money, the capital that comes in is separate and is not a power trip. So you get one vote in decision making, but we may offer a fixed rate of return up front. So we kind of need to kind of level the playing field a bit. The other issue is that this person may or may not want to get involved and interfere with the way the workers are operating. And I guess that's where the subsidiarity comes in. So we say that the board operates in and kind of steering the ship, but it doesn't go in and micromanage all the relationships that the workers have. That's their autonomy sits within this subsidiarity principle. So if this woman or bloke start throwing the weight around, we say, no, that's not how it works here. Let's have the discussion in the board and get off the backs of the workers, because that's not good. So I think that's about as much as we got for we got some personal experience of different situations in which this becomes. I'm currently in this situation with a COP26 group with a whole lot of people that formed a coalition that coming from all sorts of different perspectives, and we're trying to work out what social justice is as a campaigning thing. And it is amazingly difficult to try and get people to say, we need processes. We need a way of making decisions, and we need, that to be transparent. So it's depending on the situation, on how well established the organisation is. But it's absolutely crucial. Yeah, and the other bit of kind of philosophy was what we want to avoid is a Dr. Faustus situation, where we kind of get tricked into becoming subservient to some evil moneylender. And I think that's about it. Maybe some of my colleagues might want to chip in.
You did a fine job, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a common one, right? And it's common across solidarity economy formations. It happens in nonprofits and movement groups that maybe don't have any kind of formal incorporation. It happens in co-ops. In worker co-ops in the US in particular, we see a lot of power imbalances with cooperative developers and loan funds that offer technical assistance. That can kind of be where we see this more so than investors, although investors certainly come with their own strings as well that you got to sort out. So appreciate you all sharing that. And moving us to group 5, we were on education and leadership development. And this was about a staff coordinator who had been in the position for a long time. And so everybody was kind of just rested on their laurels and letting that person lead, and, you know, bit of a rut. Does anybody in group 5 want to share how you all talked about approaching it?
Well, I can do that. I'm Reba. We were talking about it. We weren't sure whether this was, because it was elected, was this a paid or a volunteer position, but we thought, well, let's just leave that out of the conversation. So we talked about that the organization needs to build a culture of learning around this, because maybe people are afraid to move into this position. So we thought there, you know, maybe training opportunities, or maybe creating an assistant position so that somebody can learn, job shadowing, or just skills development opportunities. We also thought that the position, maybe people are a bit wary of taking on this job because they don't know what the commitment is, because it did say that the person had done a couple of major projects. So maybe people are a bit hesitant to jump in there and take on a major project. So we also thought that, so transparency on the commitment. So what are the time requirements? What are the skill requirements? And maybe what are the possible benefits out of this position outside of, if you know, this is a paid position. But also back to my other point, like, maybe some shared responsibility on major decisions. So maybe you're not, just because the person who's been in the position for 5 years feels confident to make these decisions, maybe a new person would like to have the support of the group to do that. So some way to do some shared responsibility. So we also had some notes. We thought also maybe you need to go out and recruit new members that are interested in leadership. So maybe the other people are not, they don't want to be a leader. That's not what the role they want ever. So maybe you need to go out and look for new people. And we also said maybe term limits, so that, you know, we were discussing that. I'm not totally keen on that, but if it's, you know, if it's built in so that you're already training somebody up into that position, you know, that you don't want to have a term limit and then throw out the person with all the skills and all the knowledge just because you've decided on an arbitrary time frame. But if you have something in place to support the term limits, then I think that could make sense too. And I don't know if Kate or Martin had anything they wanted to add to that.
I think I'd only add, you know, the part of what we talked about was also just the building to be consciously trying to build a culture in which learning is acceptable, being new to a skill, but practicing it is a part of that. But also that you need to have a culture in which people want to run for election. That if the norm is that this person has been doing it and they're fine, you need to actually talk about the fact that just because they're fine doesn't mean they should do it forever. And just because you run as an alternative doesn't mean you think the person who's currently doing it is a terrible, horrible person who must be shunned afterwards, right? That we get a culture into a culture of, if there is a culture of antagonism in elections, that is not necessarily good for the organization and the community that we are building as a whole.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that support for personal development is a critical part of developing this culture where people feel able to think about taking on such roles.
Absolutely. Thank you all. You've probably all been part of a co-op or an organization that didn't have that in place and know what that is like. And it is a completely different experience than when there's that kind of support. It's a cultural shift though, right? Same thing as some of the other things that we've been talking about. In some ways, I guess all of these things are cultural shifts. And I think getting to that point about like how the small, becomes the large, right? Like what's the relationship of these small decisions we make in our organizations and then we make as movements? Part of it is just practice, but it's also culture. What is the culture that we're trying to create? We're trying to create a solidarity economy culture. These are the things that we got to think about how to apply, right? These principles. Kinsey, I want to invite you to go to the next, let's see, it's a few slides away. It's going to say invitations to keep going. There you go. Thank you. So just to update you on kind of where we are in the process, and when I say we, I mean the group that created the principles and is kind of holding the process of talking to all the different folks that we have been invited to talk to give workshops. We've been in a process of basically asking for feedback on what is there. So you can go again to the website is where the full list, all of these principles are listed. I'm going to put that in the chat. And then I'm also putting in a form to help us build the toolkit. So on the website, under each principle, there's a drop-down menu that's a set of practices. And under those practices, we're trying to put policies, specific case studies, links to, a handbook or a workbook or whatever it might be. So the thought is to take this thing that feels kind of abstract, what's the solidarity economy, and to break that down into, well, what are the actions that you have to take? What are the practices that make up solidarity economy organizations, and therefore allow us to begin to build movement with each other? And we're able to recognize each other and hold this culture. And we really want your help with that. So the group that put this together is going to sit with some feedback on the principles. You're welcome to use that form just to share any feedback about, whatever you want. But in I guess it's next week. I think it's next week, actually. So you have a week to do this. Next week, the group is finally getting together to look at some of the feedback and refine what we've got. And then we're hoping to sort of put it out to the world and invite folks to begin to adopt these. And part of the inspiration for this is the Hermes principles from the environmental justice movement. You might be familiar with that. But basically, a bunch of movement organizations got together at a gathering to address some of the problems they were having and to essentially set up some guidelines so that they could recognize when something was environmental justice and when it was not. And it created parameters that they were able to use to educate each other, to form their organizations around, to educate funders around, even to educate the government in the US around. I don't know that I can speak too much to how that's worked globally because I don't really know much about that, but it's been very powerful in the US. And so we thought, well, what if we had a version like that for solidarity economy? Even after we do our little review on the feedback that people are giving, we're going to continue to accept information that people want to include in the practices. So this is an open invitation and an ongoing way for you to use the form or shoot us an email. It's contact, I think it was on the last slide. It's contact@solidarity-economy-principles.org. Yeah, that is what it is. And share any information with us you want. And you're also welcome to, at any point, if you want to run a version of this workshop or you want to share some materials in your group or another group, we're happy to share that with you. And Kinsey, you can actually take down the slides here for just a second. And we have a few minutes, so I want to just open up for 5 minutes. If people have any particular questions that you want to ask me or you want to ask each other, or there's anything that we can clarify here before we move on to our closing.
I suppose if I can say something.
Go for it.
I suppose that I wanted to go back to what Rebecca said about not having very much time, the kind of like world situation we're in now. And I always keep coming back to, the the third in a series of disastrous IPCC reports confronting us around the climate emergency. And I wanted to kind of like link that with what was said at the beginning about, I thought it's an interesting discussion. I need to go and read this essay by Michelle, somebody or other, I can't remember, around the difference between transformative and ameliorative. And that this is, we're aiming to build a movement that's transformative. And so the kind of like the diagram that kind of like was part of this invitation to this webinar, it seemed to me with the only, it's all great stuff within it, but it's kind of like it's in a self-enclosed kind of circle and ignores some of the externalities that really need to be pushing us much more speedily and vigorously, and every other adverb that you can think of to move ahead. And so that was just kind of like one reflection that I had. I can see the importance of some of these deep dives on small things, but I really want this big picture to be upfront for, in terms of the think, particularly if you're thinking about it going beyond US and Canada. Ian and I are both from the UK, and we've talked a bit about the relationship between the cooperative movement or lack of a movement and the whole climate emergency and so on. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Appreciate your comment, Martin. And if nobody has any other questions, then I want to move us along. Yeah. Yeah, I just want us to, I don't know what the culture is in Canada, but in the US, we always like to end things with being in our bodies a little bit, and just like taking a moment to recognize the impact of having just spent, almost 2 hours on Zoom together talking about these things. And at the start of this, we were talking about this pretty heavy context of being in this colonial situation, right? With these legacies that are ignored around land and labor and lives, and the way that has created the crisis that Martin was just talking about, right? Like they're inseparable. And we actually see this as something that is a tool for addressing some of that, right? But I don't know about you, but it can kind of start to notice, like in my body, like it can start to feel a little bit heavy, So I just want to invite folks, if you want to shake a little bit, or you want to just like take a breath, or just take a moment to recognize that maybe you're sitting, maybe you're standing, but you're probably sitting, but underneath you there's earth, and maybe there's a house or a floor or a chair separating you from earth, but underneath you is the earth, and that might seem too abstract. So if you need to, think of your favorite tree or your favorite body of water. You can close your eyes, you can leave them open as you choose. But just take a moment to feel into that. And that relationship that you have, that nobody told you had to have, and nobody had to give you any principles to follow. Nobody had to explain it to you. You just naturally have that relationship. And it's a powerful relationship, right? It has meaning for you. And you can feel it in your body. You just pull it up, even just the image. You can start to feel it in your body. And I just want to take a moment to say that that's with us too, and that's not necessarily in these texts, and that's not always present when we're in our heads and we're having these conversations. But this other piece is also with us. And this other piece, this relationship that's I would use the word sacred. This is the whole point. This is what we're trying to get back to. Because when we're in this relationship with other beings, with the earth, with each other, you can kind of feel each other's presence here right now. Maybe it's comfortable, maybe it's not. That's okay, but you can feel that we're here together. That's the whole point. And when we work on restoring these, that's when we get to this place of liberation that we're looking towards. And it's about practices. It's not a destination. We're going to get there through consistently showing up for it. So I invite you to just take a breath with that, and that you did just do a bunch of practice. You did just show up for it. I want to thank you all. And I want to hand it back to Hazel to close us out.
Thank you so much, Cheyenna and Rebecca and all of you. I think these principles are incredibly important and moving. And, I just want to say by way of context, and I know some people felt there was maybe not enough context coming in, and I think that can be found in part by reading the site and some of the other resources that have been shared. But, I've been involved in a lot of different parts of the co-op movement over the last sort of 3 decades and in my working life, and especially the worker co-op movement, but not only, and also a bit involved internationally in different spaces. And I find the worker co-op movement is where the co-op principles are most lived out and best, and the solidarity economy principles are even taking that approach to a higher level. And I love this articulation of the principles. We've talked about at our federation that the solidarity economy is sort of one of the bases of our strategic plan, and yet we didn't maybe have a clear enough sense of what we meant. And I think we're gathering that together with all of you and the drafters of the principles as well. I did want to just note that the International Co-op Alliance is starting one of its kind of every 3 decades review and rewrite of the cooperative principles, and invite you all to pay attention to that and look for ways to be engaged and strengthen those. And I'd say that, this work being done in the solidarity economy principles and related spaces is really giving our federation the sort of confidence to move forward in a variety of important ways, including the JEDI work, the racial justice work, the fact we're bringing a climate change resolution to the Apex organization in Canada, Co-ops and Mutuals Canada, at the June AGM. We don't know yet how it's going to go. It failed 7 years ago, but a stronger, better one, and hopefully different groups of people will mean, and the different scenario will mean that'll pass. We're hosting a session on the solidarity economy and Principle 6, cooperation among co-ops with other associations doing co-op development work in Canada, because that stuff Rebecca spoke to around the challenges in the US, that's here as well. Yeah, so we share some of those issues. I think it's probably everywhere. It's interesting. You talk to worker cooperators and solidarity economy folk and wherever in the world, and they all feel similar issues in terms of how does the rest of the co-op sector and similar spaces work relative to them. And I think right now at this time, we're all living with a lot of grief and isolation, and that's hard on us as humans, but hopefully we're coming out of that in a somewhat soon future in terms of the isolation piece. And we, of course, can come together virtually, but I guess in summary, I just want to say I'm really inspired personally and lifted up by the solidarity economy principles and the focus on relationship, people, the earth, and how it's done with such respect and care. And thank you all for this great work. And thanks so much, Rebecca, for being here, despite what you're dealing with in a funeral right now. And our heart goes out to you. And thank you, Cheyenna. It's lovely to meet you virtually again. And I hope I can meet you in IRL, in real life, sometime soon. Everybody, if anyone else have a closing word, pop it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll say goodbye in a moment. But
learned a lot. Thank you so much. I was late, but I've enjoyed hearing everybody's voices. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to say the same. I came in quite late, and but I've really appreciated the the conversation is like stimulating. It gets you thinking about things, and just seeing connections to other work that I'm doing and how this all ties in together. And I also just really appreciate that we can connect in like this and hold space for such important work and support one another. And thank you all for what you're doing and showing up today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just also wanted to say thank you to everyone. This has been really illuminating. And also, I love the term that you use. There's a sacredness to it, right? Because it's really about us regrounding ourselves. A lot of the principles, I think, intuitively, as human beings, we're all at some level aware of, right? But conditioning, education, you know, the way that things have been presented to us, we kind of drifted off into this capitalist world that with the pandemic, everyone now sees clearly it's not working, right? So I think the grief is on so many levels. There's the grief of all the people that we have lost, but there's also a deeper grief of even a life that we have lost, right? A kind of lifestyle that we know now we can no longer run away from, that we have to rebirth ourselves. And that's difficult, right? So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for today. It's really impactful work. Like, I'm getting choked up because it's work that's allowing so many different demographics to be seen, finally, to be heard, and to find out that it's possible to create the space. And when we create that space, all of us are going to benefit from it, right? Because everyone is hurting, whether you're marginalized or you're, you know, indirectly of the, I don't want to say oppressor, but of the group that's privileged. Everyone is hurting. It's not working for anyone. So if we come at it that way, I think it has to also come with a level of patience and humility that we all didn't know any better, right? And now that we're knowing, to be open, to be patient enough to do the change work individually and systemic that needs to happen. But we go away with hope, always hopeful we can do it. Thank you.
Wow. Well, perfect. I think wonderful closing words, Juliette. Thank you. And exactly, we're hearing in the chat, and we're also perfectly on time. So in respect of everyone's precious time, we'll let you all go, but we'll meet again, I hope. All
Thank
right.
you.
Be well, everyone. Bye.